I'm Julie and welcome back to the channel. Today I'd like to show you how to make this really cool Christmas mug rug. It's made in a Quilt As You Go style, so if you've never attempted a Quilt As You Go project before, this is a really great place to start. It's super easy, it's really quick. You'll probably make this in about 20 minutes or so. As you can see from the middle, we're going to be working with a 60-degree triangle. Now I'm going to show you how to make this with your regular patchwork ruler. You don't need any fancy rulers for this one, just your regular patchwork ruler. It's a really simple and easy technique. So stick around and let's get started. To make our Christmas tree mug mat, we're going to need an 8-inch by 11-inch piece of wadding, an 8-inch by 11-inch piece of backing, a 60-degree triangle that is 5.5 inches, and I will show you how to cut one of those in just a sec. There's two 8-inch by 6-inch pieces of surrounds for the Christmas tree. There is a 1.5-inch by 2.5-inch piece for the trunk. There's two 2.5-inch by 5.5-inch pieces for the surrounds of the trunk. There's also a 2.5-inch by width of fabric strip for the binding. And apart from all the fabrics, we're also going to need our general sewing supplies, and we're going to need a rotary cutter and ruler. To cut out the 60-degree triangle, that is a 5.5-inch 60-degree triangle, what I've done is I've cut a strip of fabric that's 5.5 inches wide. Now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to find the 60-degree line, which is, I don't know if you can see it, but it's along here, the 60-degree line, and I'm going to place that line at the top of my fabric. And I'm going to move it along until I reach the corner down here, and then I'm going to make a cut from there upwards. So that's one side. Now what I'm going to do with my ruler is I'm going to flip it over, still with the 60-degree line running across the top, and I'm going to make a cut for the other side of the tree. And just like that, you have a 5.5-inch 60-degree triangle. Next, you want to lay your backing right side down and wrong side facing up, and then you'll place your piece of wadding directly on top of your backing. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the middle point of my wadding, so I'm just going to crease that, and then where I've creased it, I'm just going to put a little mark. Then we're going to place our triangle with the point at the halfway point of the wadding, and I'm just coming 1/4 inch down from the top. And I'll just pop a little pin in him to hold him into place. Then we're going to pop that aside and we'll get on to making our trunk. We have our two long pieces and our trunk piece, and we want to take our trunk piece and place it right sides together on top of one of our longer pieces and sew that down with a 1/4 inch seam. I've already attached my walking foot, and now I'm just going to sew those two pieces together using a 1/4 inch seam. So it looks like that. Now we'll take our other long piece and we'll attach it right sides together to the opposite side of our trunk. So your bottom section should now look like this. We'll pop our tree trunk aside for the minute and we'll grab our tree and our 6" by 8" pieces, and what we're going to do is we're going to attach one to each side of our tree. So working with the longer side or the 8" side, we're going to place that right sides down on top of our tree, starting at the top of the wadding. Don't worry about the overhang here, we're going to trim that off afterwards. So right sides down on top of the tree, and we're just going to stitch along that line there with a 1/4" seam. Open that out and give it a finger press. You can take your pin out now, and we're going to attach the other side to our Christmas tree. So again, just using that 8" side and placing it directly on top of the tree underneath and lining it up with the top here. And then we're going to sew that with a 1/4" seam. So now we just want to flip the other side over and give that a finger press. And you'll notice along the bottom, we've got a little bit of excess there. So what I do is I just fold it up and crease it and then snip it off, because we don't want that to come through when we pop our trunk on. So just snip that off, and on this side as well, because we don't need that bit. Then we can, after we've pressed our seams for the trunk, we can attach our trunk, making sure that the middle of the trunk is lined up with the middle of the Christmas tree. So if you like, you can fold it over and make a mark, press a mark there. I'll just give it a mark with my pen. And fold this in half so we can find our middle point. And then place our middle point on the mark that we made on the wadding, and then we'll fold it over so that it's right side facing, and then we'll stitch along the bottom there, but I'm actually going to take that across to the iron and I'm going to iron my seams flat. Okay, so I've pressed my seams towards the middle of the trunk only because I didn't want to see the seam come through on the pink side of the fabric. So I've pressed it towards the middle, and while I was there too, I also pressed it in half so that I can easily see where the halfway point is lined up with the halfway point on the bottom of the wadding. So flipping it over, placing it right side to right side, I'm going to put a couple of pins in to hold it together before I stitch my seam across the bottom. Now that our trunk is on, we'll just flip it over and we'll trim this excess off the back. Now we just have to do our binding. To prepare our binding, we want to take our 2.5-inch strip and we want to fold it in half lengthways so that the raw edges are together, and then we want to take that over to the iron and give it a press. I'm going to be machine sewing my binding on, so what I want to do is attach it to the back first so that I can flip it over and machine sew it down on the front. If you would like to hand stitch your binding on, then attach it to the front first so that you can flip it over and hand stitch it down on the back. So to attach my binding, I like to start at the bottom. I like to start at this bottom edge, and I like to start about halfway in. So I'm going to leave a tail of about 4 inches, maybe 4.5 inches. And I'm going to start attaching my binding, raw edge of the binding to raw edge of the mat with a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm starting my stitching here where I've popped my pin in, and I'm going to stitch all the way to the bottom edge and then stop 1/4 inch from the edge. With my needle in the downward position, I'm going to lift my presser foot and I'm going to rotate the mat so that it's on a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to drop my presser foot and I'm going to stitch into the corner of my mat. So that it looks like this. I've stitched there and then I've gone into the corner, and this will give us a really nice crisp crease for our binding corners. So we'll flip it up and finger press and then bring it back down on itself, and then we'll put it back under, and starting 1/4 inch from the edge we'll reverse into the edge and then continue sewing to the next corner. So we'll repeat that process of stopping 1/4 inch from the bottom edge. With our needle in the down position, we'll lift our presser foot, rotate it on a 45-degree angle and sew into the corner. Again, we'll flip the binding edge up, make a nice crease, bring it back down on itself, and we'll repeat this process until we get all of our corners sewn. So you can see that I've only sewn a short way in on the last edge of binding. That's so that we can have a long tail to play with. So what I want to do is I just want to cut the excess off here so that I can lay the other binding piece on top of that. So I have my bottom tail and I have my top tail. I lay my top tail on top of my bottom tail and I measure 2¼ inches from the edge of the bottom tail. So here, I place my ruler on top, I find my 2¼ inch mark, I make a mark on my top tail, and then I'm going to snip off this excess fabric. Then I'm going to open out my top tail and flip it up, and open out my bottom tail and place it directly on top of my top tail. And this is where it starts to get a bit tricky because there's not a lot of room here to maneuver, so you can always unpick a few stitches if you like. Now we want to place our pin in the top left hand corner going to the bottom right hand corner, because we're going to now sew these two pieces of binding together. We'll rotate that 45 degrees so that our pin is running right to left, and we want to sew corner to corner from left to right. So from this corner across the pin to the opposite corner. You can draw a line here if you like. I'm going to see if I can get this under the needle without too much fidgeting. This can be a little bit tricky to maneuver, so take your time. We're not in a hurry. We're just going to sew these two pieces together. Now before we do anything else, I just want to test this and make sure that I've got my direction right on my binding. So, yep. Now we can cut our tails off. Leave about 1/4 inch between the stitch line and where you're cutting your tails off. And then we'll finger press that seam open so it doesn't give us too much bulk. And then we'll continue to stitch and join our binding to our mug mat. Now we want to take our mug mat over to the ironing board and press our binding down. What I like to do is I like to match the edge of the binding up with the seam line and make sure that it's sitting nice and flush on top of that seam line. And then I'll give it a press. And what I also like to do is just use a little bit of school glue to hold it down while I'm sewing it on. You don't need a great deal, it's just like a really small amount. And then you put the iron back on to heat set that, and it will not move while you're trying to stitch it down. And then I'll just continue to do that until all of my binding is glued down. So the last step in making our mud mat is to stitch the binding down. So I'm just going to do that now, and I'm going to use a 1/8 of an inch seam. There you have it. Wasn't that simple? And isn't it really cute? Now you've got something to rest your Christmas night treats on. Enjoy. Happy Christmas.